You've probably seen the pictures like I have, but what was Noah's Ark really like?
Imagine finding a structure as long as a stadium buried on a mountaintop where no boat should ever be. Scientists just used electrical currents to map out the interior of the Durupinar site, and they found a massive hull with ribs still intact.
Researchers in Turkey now claim they found indisputable evidence that the story of Noah's Ark.
The proportions match the ancient cubit measurements perfectly, and the world is currently obsessed with what else might be hidden in those dark chambers. This is not just a pile of dirt. It is a structural anomaly that defies every natural law. Stick around, because the details of what is inside will leave you floored.
The vessel that changed everything. High in the rugged mountains of eastern Turkey, a massive secret has been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. This story began in 1959 when a Turkish army captain named İlhan Durupinar was looking at aerial photos of his country. He noticed a strange boat-shaped object sitting in a valley near Mount Ararat. It was 538 feet long, which is exactly the length of a massive ocean liner. At first, everyone thought it was just a weird rock formation, but as the years went by, the mystery only grew deeper. Scientists from all over the world started traveling to this remote area to see if the legendary ship from the Big Flood was actually real. The site is located in a place called the Durupinar Formation, and it is honestly one of the most beautiful and lonely places on Earth. It is surrounded by snow-capped peaks and deep valleys where the wind never seems to stop blowing. For a long time, people just looked at the surface, but everything changed when they decided to look deeper. They realized that the mound was not just sitting on top of the ground, but it seemed to be part of an ancient catastrophe. The shape is so perfect that it is hard to believe nature could ever make something like that. It has a pointed bow and a rounded stern, just like a real ship. But here is the catch. Even though it looks like a boat, most geologists for years said it was just a freak of nature caused by mudflows. That explanation worked for a while, but it did not satisfy everyone. People started asking why the formation was exactly 300 cubits long, which is the exact measurement mentioned in ancient texts. If it was just a random mudflow, why did it match those specific numbers so perfectly? Yeah, about that. Scientists decided it was time to stop guessing and start using real technology. They brought in ground-penetrating radar to see through the dirt and stone. What they found beneath the crust of the earth was enough to make anyone's jaw drop. The scans showed that there were straight lines and right angles deep underground. Nature loves curves and messy shapes, but it almost never makes a perfect 90-degree angle. The team, led by researchers like Andrew Jones and Professor Farooq Kaya, started to map out the entire area. They realized that the structure was sitting on a massive bed of limestone. The crazy part is that the internal structure seemed to have layers. It was not just a solid block of stone. There were hollow spaces and what looked like corridors. When the news of these scans first broke, the headlines went wild. The New York Post and Fox News started reporting that new evidence was supporting the old stories. This was not just about religion anymore. It was about archaeology and finding a lost piece of human history. As they dug into the data, they found that the formation had a central spine, almost like the backbone of a giant creature. This spine ran the entire length of the vessel. They also found ribs branching out from the center. This is exactly how ancient shipbuilders constructed large wooden boats. They would build a strong frame first and then cover it with planks. The scans suggested that even if the wood had turned to stone over thousands of years, the shape of the frame was still there. This started a massive debate in the scientific world. Some people were excited while others were very skeptical. But no one could deny that the images coming off the radar were incredibly strange. The researchers also noticed that the area around the formation was full of marine fossils. This is weird because the site is thousands of feet above sea level. You do not usually find seashells and saltwater deposits on top of a mountain unless that mountain was once underwater. This supported the idea of a massive flood that covered the entire region. Scientists began to realize that the terrifying truth might be that a global disaster actually happened, and this boat was the only thing that survived it. They found clay-like substances and marine deposits right in the middle of the mountain. It was like a giant footprint of the ocean had been left behind. What most people do not realize is that this discovery is not just about one boat. It is about a whole era of human history that we might have forgotten. If a ship this big was built thousands of years ago, it means the people living back then were much smarter than we give them credit for. They had to know about engineering, physics, and how to handle massive amounts of timber. And get this, the scans also showed that there might be huge metal rivets or bolts used to hold the structure together. Nature definitely does not make metal bolts. This was a huge wow factor for the team because it pointed toward advanced technology. The more they looked, the more they found. They discovered that the soil inside the formation was completely different from the soil outside. It was like a time capsule. The deeper they scanned, the more it looked like a massive construction project rather than a natural hill. The urgency of the project increased because the site is in a very unstable area. Earthquakes and mudslides happen all the time in Turkey, and scientists were worried that the evidence might be destroyed before they could fully uncover it. Every winter, the snow covers the site, making it impossible to work. They had to move fast to get the data they needed. This led to a new phase of the investigation. They were no longer just looking at pictures, they were taking physical samples. They wanted to know exactly what the ground was made of. They used long drills to pull up cores of earth from 40 feet down. When those cores came up to the surface, the smell was the first thing they noticed. It smelled like ancient, rotting organic matter. It did not smell like normal mountain dirt. This was the first big clue that they were dealing with something that was once alive. The excitement in the camp was through the roof. The search for the truth about the ancient vessel was only getting started as the team moved their focus to the chemical secrets hidden in the dirt. Secrets buried 40 feet down. The research team set up a mobile laboratory right there on the slopes of the mountain. They were using a technique called electrical resistivity tomography. Basically, they send electricity into the ground and measure how much the earth resists the current. This tells them if they are hitting rock, air, or something else like wood. The results were hands down some of the most convincing evidence ever found at the site. The electricity showed that there was a massive hull-shaped structure extending 40 feet below the surface. This hull was not just a flat piece of stone. It had multiple levels. The scans revealed 3 distinct decks, which is exactly how the ancient texts described the ship. There was a lower deck, a middle deck, and an upper deck. Each deck seemed to have its own purpose. The lower deck was very dense, which might mean it was used for heavy storage or to hold large animals. The middle and upper decks had more open spaces and what looked like smaller rooms. The symmetry of these decks was what really terrified the scientists. Nature does not build 3-level apartment complexes inside of mudslides. It was too organized and too precise to be an accident. One of the most interesting parts of the scan was the discovery of a central stairway. It looked like a long ramp that went from the bottom all the way to the top. This would have been necessary to move around a ship that was over 500 feet long. The researchers also found what looked like a large door on the side of the hull. In the old stories, the door was a very important part of the ship because it was sealed shut before the storm began. Seeing a rectangular gap in the side of the buried structure was a massive shock to everyone involved. It was like they were looking at a ghost of a real ship. The scientists also found evidence that the vessel had been damaged. There were parts of the hull that looked like they had been crushed by a massive force. This makes sense if the boat had been tossed around in a giant storm and then came to rest on a jagged mountainside. They could see where the structure had bent and where some of the internal walls had collapsed. It was a terrifying reminder of how powerful the ancient flood must have been. The force required to bend a structure of this size is almost unimaginable. It was like seeing a car crash, but on a scale that was hundreds of feet long. As they mapped out the interior, they found more wow factors. They detected large, circular objects that were spaced out along the bottom of the hull. Some people think these might have been anchor stones. In ancient times, sailors used massive stones with holes drilled in them to keep their ships steady in rough water. Finding these same shapes near the Durupinar site added another layer of credibility to the story. These stones were not made of the same rock as the mountain. They had been brought from somewhere else. This means that whoever was using this vessel was prepared for a very long and very dangerous journey. The technology also revealed that the structure was leaning to one side, It looked like it had slid down the mountain before getting stuck in its current position. This slide probably happened during a massive earthquake or a later flood. This movement is what actually helped preserve the site. It got buried under a thick layer of mud and silt, which acted like a protective blanket. If it had stayed on the surface, the wood would have rotted away or been used for firewood by local tribes thousands of years ago. Being buried for 5,000 years was the only way it could have survived this long. The team also used thermal cameras to see if there were any temperature differences in the ground. They found that certain areas inside the formation stayed much cooler than the outside. This usually happens when there are large hollow voids or tunnels underground. These empty spaces were once the rooms and hallways where the survivors of the flood lived. The idea that there are still empty rooms sitting 40 feet under the mountain is enough to give anyone chills. It is like a giant haunted house from the beginning of time. Everything about the site was starting to feel more like a crime scene than a geological study. They were finding evidence of a massive construction project that had been caught in a world-ending disaster. The sheer scale of the vessel was hard to wrap your head around. It was wider than a football field and longer than most modern cargo ships. To think that someone built this by hand with basic tools is almost impossible to believe. But the data does not lie. The straight lines and deck layers are there, and they are not moving. The scientists realized that if they wanted more proof, they had to stop looking at the shape and start looking at the actual atoms in the soil. What the dirt remembers. The soil analysis turned out to be the real game changer for the project. Scientists took hundreds of samples from inside the formation and compared them to samples from the surrounding mountainside. What they found was truly bizarre. The dirt from inside the boat shape had almost 3 times as much organic matter as the dirt from just a few feet away. This organic matter was the remains of something that was once alive, like wood or plants. In a normal mountain, you find rocks and minerals, but you do not find massive amounts of ancient organic material buried 40 feet deep. Yeah, about that. The chemistry of the soil also showed very high levels of potassium. Now, for starters, potassium is a big deal because it is a major byproduct of decaying wood. When a large wooden structure rots away over thousands of years, it leaves behind a chemical fingerprint. The potassium levels inside the Durupinar site were off the charts. It was like a giant neon sign pointing to the fact that a massive wooden object had once sat in that exact spot. This was not a guess. It was a scientific fact verified by multiple labs in Turkey and the United States. They also tested the acidity of the soil. The ground inside the formation was much more acidic than the ground outside. This is exactly what happens when you have a large amount of organic decomposition. As the wood and other materials rot, they release acids into the earth. For 5,000 years, those acids have been soaking into the soil, leaving behind a record of what was once there. The researchers realized they were looking at the chemical ghost of a ship. The wood might be gone, but the earth still remembers where it was. But here is the catch. The carbon dating of the organic material came back with a range between 3,500 and 5,000 years ago. This is a massive wow factor because it matches the timeline of the Great Flood found in historical records from all over the world. Whether you look at ancient Sumerian texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Bible, the timing of the catastrophe is always about the same. Finding soil that matches that exact date is almost too perfect. It suggests that the story of the flood is not just a myth, but a real event that left behind physical evidence. The team also found traces of animal remains in the soil. They were microscopic, but they were there. They found bits of hair, skin, and even tiny fragments of bone. This suggests that the vessel was not just carrying cargo, it was carrying living creatures. The variety of the remains was also very strange. They found evidence of animals that do not normally live in the mountains of Turkey. How did those animals get there? The only logical explanation is that they were brought there on a boat. The crazy part is that these remains were mixed in with the organic wood matter, suggesting they were all part of the same structure. Scientists also detected traces of pitch or bitumen in the soil. Bitumen is a natural tar-like substance that was used in ancient times to waterproof ships. If you were building a giant wooden boat to survive a massive storm, you would definitely coat the whole thing in tar to keep the water out. Finding chemical traces of this exact material inside the formation was another huge win for the research team. It showed that the builders knew exactly what they were doing and were following the standard shipbuilding practices of the time. The more they tested the dirt, the more the story came together. It was like a giant jigsaw puzzle where every piece was made of chemistry. They found that the soil had high levels of iron as well. This might have come from the metal bolts or rivets that held the ship together. As the metal rusted away over thousands of years, it bled into the surrounding soil, leaving behind high concentrations of iron oxide. This matches the radar scans that showed metallic anomalies throughout the structure. It all points to a massive man-made object that was built with wood and metal. The people living near the mountain don't need fancy tools or radar to tell them what's buried there. For generations, they've shared stories about a massive ship that came to rest on the high peaks when a giant flood covered the entire world. To them, this isn't some brand new discovery found by a satellite, it's just a basic part of their history. Depending on which village you visit, they might call the mountain Kuti Dagi or Ararat, but the core of the legend stays exactly the same. They grew up hearing these accounts from their parents and grandparents, making the site a deeply respected part of their culture. For these locals, the sudden interest from global researchers is almost funny, because the science is only now catching up to what they've always known was true. While the villagers rely on their heritage and faith, the scientists are strictly focused on the hard data. They are looking for soil samples, radar images, and chemical results to prove the site is man-made. But even the most skeptical researchers are starting to admit the evidence is pointing towards something massive. The gap between old legends and modern science is finally closing, and both sides are starting to agree that something incredible happened on that mountain. The terrifying truth of the flood started to feel very real as the scientists looked at the evidence of a global catastrophe that nearly wiped out everything. The terrifying truth of the flood. What really terrified the world when these findings came out was the realization that a global flood was not just a story for kids. If this vessel is real, it means the entire Earth was once covered in water. That is a terrifying thought. Imagine a storm so big that it covers every mountain and drowns every city. The evidence at the Durupinar site suggests that the water rose thousands of feet. The marine fossils and salt deposits found at the top of the mountain are proof that the ocean was once there. This was not just a small local flood, it was a world-ending event. Basically, the discovery of the Ark is a warning from the past. It shows us that the Earth can go through massive, violent changes in a very short amount of time. The scientists found that the sediment layers around the vessel were laid down very quickly, which happens during a catastrophic flood. It was not a slow process that took millions of years. It happened all at once. The force of the water must have been incredible to lift a ship that weighed thousands of tons and carry it to the top of a mountain range. The researchers also thought about the survivors. If this boat is the only reason humans are still here, then we were very close to being completely gone. The idea that all of human history depends on one wooden ship is a lot to handle. It makes you realize how fragile our world really is. The discovery has caused a lot of people to rethink their lives and what they believe. It is not just about the past, it is about our future too. If it happened once, could it ever happen again? That is the question that most people are afraid to ask. There is also the mystery of why the vessel is there specifically. Some people believe that Mount Ararat was the first piece of land to emerge from the water as the flood started to go down. The ship would have been floating on top of the world and then got stuck as the water receded. This would explain why it is sitting in a high valley surrounded by peaks. It was the only place to land. The scientists found that the ground under the formation is a mix of volcanic rock and mud, which suggests that the mountain was still being formed when the boat arrived. The first thing that really grabs you about this ship is just how massive it is. It's hard to wrap your head around the size until you think about what it was actually for. Trying to keep thousands of animals alive and fed for months at a time isn't just a big job. It's a logistical nightmare. You would need an incredible amount of planning to pull that off. When researchers used special ground scans, they saw that the inside was divided into all these tiny rooms. This was a smart move. It's the perfect way to keep different kinds of animals separate so they stay safe and don't hurt each other while the ship is moving. They also found proof that the builders installed a ventilation system. If you pack a giant boat full of animals, the air is going to get gross and dangerous really fast. Without a way to get fresh air down to the lower decks, everything inside would have suffocated. The fact that the people who built this actually planned for airflow shows they weren't just lucky. They were master engineers who knew exactly how to keep a massive crew alive in a closed space. Even with all these findings, a lot of people are still arguing about it. It's a pretty controversial topic because not everyone wants to admit the Ark might actually be a real physical object. Some geologists who study how the Earth forms claim the whole thing is just a natural syncline. That's a fancy way of saying the ground folded in a weird way that just happens to look like a boat. But that argument starts to fall apart when you look at the evidence. When you show them the radar scans of the interior decks or the chemical traces of ancient wood and metal, they don't really have a good answer. The proof is starting to pile up, and it's getting harder for the skeptics to look the other way. Right now, this is the most studied spot on the planet, and the mystery is only getting bigger. Researchers are getting ready to do more drilling to see what's deeper down. This is a tough job because the Turkish government protects the site, and many people consider it a holy place. They have to be extremely careful not to damage anything. They are stuck using tools that don't break the surface for now, but everyone is waiting to see what is hidden in those hollow rooms 40 feet underground. We might be just one dig away from a discovery that changes history. Did scientists finally find the real Noah's Ark? Or is this just a masterpiece of nature that happened to mimic a ship? The evidence of decks, organic wood, and ancient chemicals suggests something truly extraordinary lies beneath the Turkish soil. Could this discovery change everything we know about the ancient world and the catastrophes that shaped us? Tell us what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the mountain secrets, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another mystery. Thanks for watching.